Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
And welcome back to another episode of Turn the Page, your Syosset Public Library podcast. My name is Kaye, and I'm going to be one of your hosts today. I'm joined here with my coworker Jen and the lovely TJ Klune, who is an American author of fantasy and romantic fiction. His work features gay and LGBTQIA+ characters. His fantasy novel, The House in the Cerulean Sea, is a New York Times bestseller and the winner of the 2021 Alex and Mythopoetic Awards. The House in the Cerulean Sea was also named by the Washington Post as one of 2020's best feel-good reads. Publisher Weekly calls it a thought-provoking Orwellian fantasy in its starred review. Kirkus praised Klune for his art of creating enduring characters, something which I agree with. The novel was named one of Amazon's best science fiction and fantasy books of 2020. Today, we're going to discuss its sequel, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. So welcome, TJ. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so appreciative of being here. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in. Let's talk about the new book. What can you tell us about Somewhere Beyond the Sea?
Somewhere Beyond the Sea is something I started working on in secret in the summer of 2022. Even my publisher did not know that I was going to be working on it. I'll get into it in a little bit, but I felt the need to revisit this world. And Somewhere Beyond the Sea picks up a few months after the first book ends. But instead of following Linus Baker, this time we get to follow Arthur Parnassus, the headmaster of this orphanage on Marsyas Island. And there was something that I was really wanting to focus on. It's actually twofold. The things that I wanted to focus on in this book is A, what happens when your best isn't good enough? What happens when you try and try and try, and yet you are still met with resistance? You are still essentially told no. And secondly, the biggest thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially in the United States with what we're seeing with the attacks on LGBTQIA youth, is if all of these decisions are being made on behalf of children, if all of these decisions are being made for children, such as their trans classmates being targeted, their books being removed from schools, being told what they can or cannot learn about, why is nobody asking the children what they want? Why does nobody go to them and say, hey, we're making all of these changes because we're targeting specific people in your classes? What do you think about that? The reason that they don't do that is because they know what the answers are going to be. They're frightened that people in power know very well that the children of today are smarter, more worldly than we ever were at their age, because they carry the infinite little magic box in their pockets wherever they go that gives them access to almost any piece of information that humanity knows. They know about wars and genocides. They know about their classmates being targeted. They know about books being removed from their schools. They know about laws that are being enacted to denigrate their trans and LGBTQIA classmates. They see their classmates of color getting pulled out of school because their hair isn't what it's supposed to look like or anything like that. And it's mind-boggling to me that so many decisions are being made on behalf of kids, yet nobody is asking for their input. And so that's what I wanted to focus on with Somewhere Beyond the Sea, this idea of people like Arthur and Linus raising their kids, protecting them, but also wanting to let them use their voices. But what happens when the kids are growing up and they start pushing back? At what point does a parent say, I have to let them make their own mistakes, I have to let them make their own decisions, all while still freaking out about letting kids make their own decisions because you want to protect them as much as you can? So I love this book because it is so much about the push and pull between teaching your kids to be the best versions of themselves, but then actually letting them go out to do that, how hard that can be.
I will say, because I finished the book last night, that there were the parts where like Arthur realized like, oh, I'm a dad.
Mm-hmm.
Were most of the times when his children were challenging his worldviews and challenging like how he was standing up for them. And I thought that was really interesting.
Well, it makes
So
sense. It makes sense because Arthur has given them the tools. He's given them the chance to heal. And now that they're enacting what he has taught them, he's kind of like a little freaked out about it because he's like, I did this.
yeah,
I did this. And what does that mean for me? And what does that mean? I mean, I think Arthur, like most people in his position, loves being a parent and loves that, but he also doesn't quite understand when is it time for him to step back. And I love that because Arthur Parnassus is the definitive person of standing up for other people's for and speaking up and helping others become the best versions of themselves. But can he do that for his own kids? Can he step back and let them do that?
right. So speaking to the children, I do love one thing I really do love about your writing is you seem to know exactly how kids talk.
Mhm.
Like you have this way of getting their chaotic cadence down to like a T. Do you talk to a lot of kids? Do you have a life? I'm just curious. Because I can picture my 6-year-old nephew saying some of the things that Lucy says in the book, and I'm like, he must
Yeah.
talk to children.
I have been it's been very humbling to hear that from so many different people. I get parents, I get teachers, I get social workers telling me I have a Lucy, or I have a Fee, I have a Sal, I have a Theodore, I have a Chauncey, I have a Talia. I have all of these different kids. Some of them have all 6 kids in various shapes or forms. What I love about kids, and this is going back to the idea of kids making their own decisions. What I love about kids, particularly younger kids, is that they don't have the filter of cynicism that comes with age. They say whatever is in their head, no matter how weird or crazy or out of pocket it can be. And I adore that. It's because when we get older, we get that filter. And I think that sometimes that makes us lose the magic of ourselves because with that filter does come cynicism, and with cynicism does come the idea that the world isn't very magical. So when you're writing about kids, there's a tendency, and something that I've fallen for in previous books, to make the kids a little too precocious, to make them sound wise beyond their years. And that can work sometimes, but at the same time, you have to let kids talk like kids. They have to say whatever is in their head. And I've been lucky enough in my career to speak with thousands of children all over the world. And I remember what it's like being a kid. And I think so many queer people have stronger memories of their childhood because so many of us didn't get to have a childhood. I didn't get to have a childhood. I learned early on that anything that brought me joy was something that would be taken away from me. So everything that I loved, reading, writing, comic books, video games, all of that had to be done in secret because if somebody found out, my parents, that would be taken away from me because it made me happy. So I had to grow up a lot quicker than some of my peers. And with that came that filter of cynicism. Not just because a filter of cynicism, but a filter because if I said the wrong thing, then something could happen. So I think that I can tap into what a kid sounds like, A, because I have so many younger readers, but B, because I remember what it's like having that taken away. I remember what that's like having to force yourself to be more of an adult, to talk like an adult, and how damaging that can be to a kid because you shouldn't have to be worried about things like that when you're a kid. So I think a large part of it comes from the fact that I lost my youth and the fact that now that I get to tap into it, I think there's still part of me that knows what it feels like to be those kids, to know what it feels like to talk like they do. And in this way, I can write in these books kids talking like they do and not have them get in trouble for talking like they do, which I didn't get. So I think a big part of it is just remembering what it was like for me and not having those divisions in place, those blockers in place, those people in place that wouldn't let me talk.
Yeah, I feel like it really treats children as whole people, which I feel like is probably something that a lot of parents struggle with at times.
Mhm.
Something that I sort of know well too. And it makes me think about how relevant that is right now too, because I feel like I've been reading a lot recently about like the next big civil rights movement is going to be children, because we're the first generation of children to grow up on the internet with their parents posting their every single move are now turning 15, and some of them are suing their parents, you know, for like their life rights back and stuff like that. And so it feels
Yeah.
very good too to be treating children as whole people.
Right. And you know, you see in certain regards those kids whose parents have put their entire life online, they don't want that. They want to be able to be normal and offline and not have to worry about people seeing them and judging them. And I never really understood the whole, we're a social media family. You can watch our every single step, watch our kids being born, watch our kids grow up, watch our kids. I mean, A, not only does that can potentially put targets on them, but B, my God, the internet is a cesspool of bullies and vitriol and bigotry and all of this kind of stuff. It just seems like that you'd want to protect everyone as much as you possibly can. But at the same time, everybody has a right to do what they want to do and celebrate how they want. I wish that sometimes people would think of the ramifications of posting every single action of your life online. And this comes from a person whose only remaining social media is Instagram, and I only post pictures of books and my dog. That's about it.
Yeah, I think as the generation who grew up with like the birth of social media, I know so many people who are taking themselves off of it all.
Yeah.
And I think that's healthier. And
Well, it is.
I agree with what Jen said. I don't think it's okay to put your kids on Facebook.
Any internet slang that I've learned in the last 5 years has been against my will. I'm 42 years old. I have reached that age where if I don't know what something is, some new trendy slang, I'm never going to learn. I will not learn. And it's me saying, I'm not going to learn this. I do not care.
Liberating. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is liberating, because I'm like, you know what? Come up with whatever words you want to come up. Like, what was the one that my nephew told me the other day? Riz
Yeah.
for charisma. I was like, just say charisma. Just say it.
I'm glad my nephew's still a little too young for that. And my sister's good. She doesn't give them the internet. Like,
Oh my God. Yeah. It's some, but you know, at the same time, our parents probably felt the same way when we were growing up and the internet was coming into everybody was like, you can go online and talk to people in other parts of the world. That's scary. Oh, it kind of is.
I remember my mom being like, don't tell them your name. And I was like, okay, relax.
Well, yeah, but it's funny to me is that we grew up with the whole idea of stranger danger. And now we call strangers to get in their cars to take us places. It's fun.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think of it like that. Oh, that's so funny. I'm going to bring us back to the book first and the setting, because I'm kind of curious about how you choose your magical beings in your world, and if you have a favorite magical being that you've either featured or not featured.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about these books, my favorite is always going to be Chauncey. Chauncey is my favorite everything. Chauncey is the reason pretty much that the sequel exists, because I have a tendency to hear character voices in my head. And when I finish with them, they kind of go back to sleep and don't do anything more because I'm done. Like In the Lives of Puppets, that's done. Under the Whispering Door, that's done. I'll never go back to those books because I said what I wanted to say. But for the love of God, Chauncey does not shut up in my head. It is always, and it's not even the version of Chauncey that I first met when I started writing the books. It's Daniel Henning's narration of Chauncey from the audiobook. That's the voice I hear in my head. And Chauncey kept on talking and kept on saying, I think there's another story. I think there's another story. And turns out that there was, but I can't even tell you what kind of a magical creature Chauncey is. He's a sea cucumber mixed with an octopus, and boy, oh boy, does he have my favorite part in the new book. It's such a ridiculous scene, and if you've read it, you'll know. I'll just say it's about armpit hair, and
Yes.
it
was very silly.
I don't make myself laugh when I write, because this idea of getting high on your own supply, and I just don't do that. But I will admit, during that scene, I was cackling because it is ridiculous, it is stupid, but it is so Chauncey to do something like that. It absolutely is something that Chauncey would do, and I adore him. I adore my little blobby boy of sunshine. Favorite kind of mythical creature, though. Oh man. I would probably have to say, going back to a different series, werewolves. I love werewolves. I love the mythology of werewolves. I love how how the horror movies with werewolves. I mean, I grew up watching old black and white horror movies. I grew up watching An American Werewolf in London. I grew up watching all of these kinds of movies. So werewolves, it's probably why the Green Creek series exists in the first place. But yeah, werewolves is probably my favorite.
Yeah, you've spent a lot of time with werewolves, I can
I
tell.
have spent many, many years with werewolves. In fact, 10 years ago is when I started writing Wolf Song. 10 years in 2014, and now in 2024 we just re-released the final book in the series, Brother Song, again. So it's out now. I'm done with werewolves.
No, for now.
For now. Yeah, for now. We'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah, so I'm curious about returning to the story and the characters
Mhm.
of Cerulean Sea in secret as you did a few years later. When you are approaching writing a sequel, do you attempt to revisit the first book with the eyes that you had at the time, or are you going back and looking for something new? Are you looking for the bits of that lack closure, or pieces that you feel like you still want to wrap up a little bit? Like, what is your process of returning to an old thing that you've written?
So for how many sequels I've written, this might be a little shocking. I hate writing sequels. Because when you're writing a sequel, you are bound to the rules of the first book. You are bound to everything that you did in the first book. So I can't do something that would technically break a rule that I made in the first book, which can be kind of constricting. That's how it feels when you're going into sequel, because it's not brand new. The world isn't brand new. The characters technically aren't brand new. So when you're going into a sequel, you might lose that element of surprise that you have with the first book. So and something else too, if I tried to write the same book over and over and over again, I would get bored, and my readers would know I was bored, and they would get bored, and that's just not how it works. So while this technically is a sequel, and while I don't think it can stand alone, I wanted to make this its own story. I wanted it to have a beginning and middle and end. And so while it does pull, obviously, from the first book, this is its own story. This is its own thing. Arthur is not Linus Baker, and he has his own motivations. He has his own hopes, fears, dreams, desires. And while there are some similarities, and while there are some through lines, I wanted this to feel like a different kind of story, which is why at the very beginning we are reintroduced to the island. We're reintroduced to the characters. We get to see everybody, and then I take that all away by sending Arthur and Linus to the city where Arthur has to go and testify. So in the original book, it took a little bit to lead up to introduce all of the kids. In this one, you get the kids right away, and then they're gone. And now it's a different kind of story. And that was important to me, because I wanted I wanted it to feel familiar, but not to the point of where you said, I've read this before. I've done this already. So while there are Easter eggs, while there are bits and pieces from the first book, I wanted this novel, this sequel, to feel like it was a new thing, to feel like it could have been a first book, to feel like it was something that was completely different. At the end of the day, no matter what I do, I cannot recreate the feeling that readers had when they got the first book. Times are different. A lot of people read that first book of the pandemic when everybody was stuck at home. I can't recreate that feeling. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to tell a different story set in the same world with the same characters, but with different ideas and motivations, and a different idea for the future. And so I think that helped, because yes, I was writing a sequel. Yes, it involved the same characters, but I got to see it through Arthur's eyes as opposed to Linus's. Arthur has been in the trenches. Arthur knows the ins and outs of this community and how it works. And I got to find out who Arthur was down to his bones in this book.
Yeah, I will say I can see that now that you've described it that way. Reading both of them, like, yeah, the first book is Linus and the second book is Arthur for sure. Like, Linus is hesitant at the beginning and he's cautious, and
Mhm.
he grows to care for the children, and that's the story. Whereas like Arthur is a fighter, and so you have like that kind of that through line of like Arthur being like, I'm standing up and I'm doing this thing, and they can be juxtaposed a little bit one to the other.
But also with Arthur, and it was very important for me to do this, was to show that even Arthur Parnassus needs help. sometimes, that even Arthur Parnassus can't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, even though he wants to, even though he desperately tries to. And I think this book is not a deconstruction of the character of Arthur Parnassus, but it is pulling away the curtain just a little bit to be able to see what kind of person he is. We got to know Arthur in a way in the first book, but in this book we get to see what makes him tick. We get to see what goes on underneath, and the fact that he is not a perfect person. He is not some god amongst men. He is a human being who happens to also be a phoenix, but at the same time, he makes mistakes. He tries to do his best, but he also makes mistakes. And I think that's important to recognize, that nobody, especially in these books where I'm trying to prove a point about bigotry, nobody in these books is fallible. I mean, everyone is fallible. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody, and we have to learn from them. That's the whole point.
Yeah, I liked your message that yes, nobody's perfect, but it's also okay to ask for help. I like that Sal constantly in the book is like, you can ask us, like, yeah, we're your children, but we're also standing with you, and like you can ask us to help you with things.
I love Chauncey, but I have to say I am most proud of Sal's arc in this book, because going from the first book, Sal was quiet and reserved and distrustful for very good reasons. And in this book, we get to see him become the leader, a leader, not against Arthur, but for his brothers and sisters. We get to see the children pushing back, saying, why do you do things like this when we know it doesn't work? Or why do you say certain things when you know that's what they want to hear? And I love that we get to have that sort of dialogue and interactions, because that's what should be happening in homes everywhere. Kids should be able to be allowed to ask questions and say, I don't think this is fair. Why do we have to do it this way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Sal definitely blossomed from House to Beyond.
Yeah, me too. I love him.
He was great. And like exactly what you're saying, like when Lucy hears that David's allowed to be a monster, but Lucy's not. And like they sit down and they have a conversation about that later. And I thought that was really lovely, because you're right. We don't see that I never had that growing up. There was never a conversation.
Yeah. And I think about that a lot. And a lot of this, look, I'm not gonna lie to you about this. A lot of these little conversations that you have between adults and children is a little bit of wish fulfillment. I wish I could have had that. I wish parents would have listened to me. I wish adults would have heard me when I said I was getting bullied or when I was getting hurt or anything like that. They didn't. But now with this, even if it's something you don't want to hear, even if it's something that concerns you, even if it's something that terrifies the hell out of you, we should still be listening to what they have to say, because we don't know if we're going to learn something new about them and about ourselves. And I think that's important, that no matter what age you get, that you never stop growing as a person. Because by the time you reach an adulthood, you may think you know what's going on. You have no idea. You have no idea about anything. And that's the whole point of life, is to continue to learn and grow and become the better versions of ourselves.
So your other popular novels feature werewolves, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Has your previous fantasy writing experience influenced the kinds of fantasy you want to write going forwards?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. I don't want to say I fly by the seat of my pants, even though it feels like I do that quite a lot. But as the older I get, the more I realize that I'm going to be in fantasy and science fiction for the rest of my life. This is my home. This is what I grew up reading, and this is where I'm happiest. Even though my first books weren't science fiction and fantasy, way back in 2011, they were contemporary dramas. But now with science fiction and fantasy, I'm going to stay here permanently. And just for the fact that it gives me permission to make up worlds however I want to see them. I don't have to worry about stupid things like homophobia if I'm writing this world. Homophobia is boring. Homophobic people are boring people, and I don't necessarily need to include that in the books that I'm writing. I can focus on other forms of bigotry and other things that I think are affecting the world as it is right now. But homophobia, I've experienced that too much in my life, and I don't give a crap about about writing stuff like that. I love being able to create worlds where I get to make the rules, and I get to make the characters how I want to make them. This has been my dream ever since I was a kid. I was the kid who carried notebooks with him and filled them with stories. I wanted to be an author ever since I was a little kid. The fact that I got to grow up and do what I do is A, insane, but also B, humbling and extraordinary. Not many people get to say they grew up to do what they love, and especially coming from where I did, growing up in rural Oregon in the 80s and 90s and not having a support system or support network, and growing up in the time of HIV and AIDS, and that's what we knew about queer people then, was that they were dying. And then you have people in life who do not treat you the way that they should, and it all coalesces to make us who we are. And I could have been easily a very bitter, cynical jerk, and I think maybe I was in my 20s a little bit. But as I grew, I realized that the best thing I can do for this world is to try and make people have a little bit of hope. And that's what I'm going to continue to do with my writing. I may make you sob because I have werewolves that make stupid decisions. I might make you laugh because of the Antichrist and a boy blob going on Saturday adventures. But at the end of the day, when you close one of my books, I want you to feel something. I want you to feel like, hey, these characters aren't real, but they're real to me, because every character I've written is not real, but they are real to me.
I love that. Your next book should have librarians in it.
It should, huh?
Main
I should write an entire thing about a library.
Totally could. I endorse that. Do it. All right, so I think we're gonna wrap up here. If you'd like to add anything else.
Protect trans youth.
Yes.
Always protect trans youth, because they if you are in the LGBTQIA community, we must protect our brothers and sisters and non-binary pals. We have to do that. It is up to us, especially when a big portion of transphobia comes from cis white gay men. The call is coming from inside the house. So we need to step up and protect our community, because if one of us falls, they're going to come for the rest of us. They absolutely will. So stand up for your trans family and let them know that you have their backs, because right now there's a lot of people who don't.
Love that. All right. Thank you, TJ. This has been wonderful. And this is Kaye and Jen signing off from Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.